The Gospel according to the 4th chapter of St. Mark.
Glory to you, Lord.
That day when evening came, he said to his disciples, "Let us go over to the other side." Leaving the crowd behind, they took him along just as he was in the boat. There were also other boats with him. A furious squall came up, and the waves broke over the boat so that it was nearly swamped. Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. The disciples woke him and said to him, "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" He got up, rebuked the wind, and said to the waves, "Quiet, be still." Then the wind died down, and it was completely calm. He said to his disciples, "Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?" They were terrified and asked each other, "Who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
Please be seated. If you have little ones with you this morning, you might like to join Heidi and Zeekers downstairs for junior church. They're welcome down there right now. You're always welcome to stay as well, but of course you do have a special lesson down there just for you if you choose to go down. Looks like a good crew today. Of course. For those staying up here, I don't know if you felt as I did, something that I can also confirm through further study, that there is a feeling throughout all of the readings this morning of an overwhelming power. Overwhelming power. The kind that terrified the disciples, for instance, when Jesus spoke to the winds and the waves, and they just stopped. He said, "Why be so afraid?" He was referring to the storm. But then Mark says they were terrified because of the overwhelming power of his voice. But since we're not in a position right now where we are actually facing such a power, and for that matter, very rarely face overwhelming power in our lives, it takes some imagination to consider this overarching theme throughout all of the readings properly. I remember being terrified when I was a young person by a scene from the movie Willow. Remember the movie Willow? Yeah, a few of you. Raise your hand if you saw Willow. Don't worry, I'll get to less obscure movies as I go on. All right. I remember this scene. It terrified me as a kid. The heroes of the story were called to protect this little baby that was supposed to be the only person who would be able to overcome the evil witch queen of the... it's a fantasy adventure, you know. Evil witch queen who's taking over the entire world by using dark magic with her power to reign, you know. So, very powerful evil queen, and this one little baby that theoretically can protect everybody or deliver everybody. So the heroes have overwhelming odds. They're doing a pretty good job throughout most of the movie. You know, they're gaining in their understanding, and they're fighting these different fights, and they're overcoming big armies, and it's going pretty well. And then, they lose the baby. The evil queen has the baby up in the castle, but by then they've gained so many allies. They've got a little army on their side. So they're like, "That's okay. We're just going to go to the castle. We're going to go get that baby back." And they show up outside the wall, and the evil queen looks over the wall, and she starts laughing because she's like, "Oh, you can't possibly oppose me. These aren't warriors, they're pigs." And as she says it, everyone in the army immediately, helplessly, horrifically, starts transforming slowly and consciously into pigs. Young Aaron's watching that on the screen, thinking about all the victories that all these, strong people, these willful people have won on the way, and all of a sudden, boom, they're pigs. Overwhelming power. It terrified me. I hated it. I did not enjoy watching that. So if you haven't seen Willow, let's try Deep Impact. Remember that from the 90s? Raise your hand if you saw Deep Impact. Is that one worse? Oh no. That was a big blockbuster. I figured more people saw that one. That was a disaster movie where there was a comet hurtling toward the earth, and they send up a rocket ship with nuclear weapons on board. They were to blow that thing up, but instead they just blow it in half. And now there's a big piece and a small piece coming, right? Well, they do eventually deal with the big piece that was supposed to come second, but they can't do anything about the small piece. But the small piece is still going to land in the Atlantic Ocean. It's going to destroy a bunch of cities on both sides, Well, one of the main stories is a reporter who breaks the story of the government knowing that this comet is coming. And, a year out, she breaks the story, and the world kind of connects her being the face of the story, telling them the truth. They learn to trust her. So when that big wave that's going to destroy all the eastern seaboard is coming, she has a spot on a helicopter. They're going to save her so that she can keep communicating with the people. And as she's leaving the building, she sees her boss there with her little dog. She's playing because she has nowhere to go. And they have a playroom for the kids. And she's like, well, we can't possibly get out of the city. Maybe being on the 14th story will survive. And they've already been saying, there's no way. You can't. Every building's going to be toppled. So she gives up her seat on the helicopter, and she goes off to the coast, the actual Atlantic coast, where her father, who's been estranged from her for years, has a beach house. And she takes her last few moments to reconcile with him. And then as the big wave comes, 100-foot wave, she just grabs him and says, Daddy, and they die. Overwhelming power. What else are you supposed to do? Right? You just give up. There's nothing else you can do. You can't possibly fight that. All right, raise your hand if you've seen Titanic. Come on, that one at least, right? At least? Yeah, okay. Pick your scene, right? I mean, you got the guys playing Closer, My God, to Thee on the deck, there's nothing else we can do. Let's see if we can calm people down a little bit, and you got the couple that are cuddling in the bed while the water rushes in. You got the mom trying to put the kids to sleep, in their cabin, because they're like, well, maybe they'll be asleep when we sink finally. It's overwhelming power. There's nothing you can do about it. It's important to remember stories like that. They're powerful stories and memorable stories for a reason. Because we don't like to think often about all the powerful things in the world that we can do absolutely nothing about. Because that's discouraging. It feels hopeless. It feels helpless. But you have to remember, because there are such things, right? The psalmist is depicting such things throughout the psalm. You didn't see any particular reading highlighted because they've all got something to say on this topic. But if I had to highlight one, I'd pick the psalm, because he's talking about that, the overwhelming stuff, right? So looking at verses 2 and 3, it says that when people attacked us, they would have swallowed us alive when their anger flared against us. The flood would have engulfed us, verse 4, and the torrent would have swept over us. The raging waters would have swept us away. It says, has anyone, by the way, really felt water like that, where you were completely powerless against it? I did. I almost lost a friend who was a pastor. We were on a pastor's canoe trip on the Pine River in flood stage. We're like, we all canoe a lot. We're going to be just fine. And one of our canoes got turned, hit a deadfall, and I was there with this pastor who fell out of the canoe. He was my canoe mate. I stayed in the canoe. He fell out. And he was holding on to this deadfall, and his feet were underneath. And we're both trying hard to pick him back up out of the water, because who knows what happens when he lets go, right? We couldn't fight that current. I actually got onto the deadfall itself. It was able to support me, so I got onto the deadfall, and I tried pulling on him. No hope. He was a big guy, strong guy. He couldn't move himself an inch. All we could do was say a little prayer and have him let go and hope he came out on the other side, which he did. Thank God. But you can't fight water like just this weekend. Somebody got parents of 6 children. They're all like teenagers and stuff. But did you read about this in Florida? I think they were from New Jersey. They were visiting in Florida, and they stepped outside the safe zone. There was no lifeguard there. Riptide. Overwhelming power. You got to remember that it's there. It exists. When the psalmist talks about that water engulfing a person, raging waters carrying them away, that's real. That's a power that you don't think much about, but once you felt it, you'll never forget it again. You just can't fight power like that. And the disciples saw that in the boat. That's why they were terrified. They're like, who has the power to just stop water, stop winds? Job, I imagine, felt that, right? I could highlight any of these readings, right? Because Job, for chapter on chapter on chapter on chapter, is discussing with his friends why on earth he has to suffer. He's done nothing wrong. And he keeps saying to God, how is this fair? And his friends keep saying, well, you must have done something wrong. God doesn't do unfair things. And lousy friends. But at least they sat there for a week in silence. That was the best they did. And then God shows up in a storm and shuts Job instantly up. Because there's that overwhelming power. Nothing is more powerful than him. When you experience overwhelming power, there's nothing you can do about it. That kind of power demonstrates that we aren't, despite all of our advances, despite having conquered so many things in this world. And thank God for all that. That's not a problem. That's a good thing. We are built, we are designed to rule this place, to make it better. That's what we're here for. That's our purpose. So good on us when we collect our power together and we defeat something that's horrible. But there are still things that are left that make you helpless, hopeless. But again, if I had to highlight any part of these readings, it would be the psalm. Because while there are such things as overwhelming powers out there that you can do absolutely nothing about, the point of this psalm is saying you can acknowledge this truth while also acknowledging that the most overwhelming power in the universe is on your side. Whatever the overwhelming power is that scares you, it is not more powerful. Or to put it another way, whatever the overwhelming power is that scares you, the power that scares it is on your side. If the Lord had not been on our side, let all Israel say, if the Lord had not been on our side when people attacked us, they would have swallowed us alive when their anger flared against us. The flood would have engulfed us. The torrent would have swept over us. The raging waters would have swept us away. Praise be to the Lord, who has not let us be torn by their teeth. We have escaped like a bird from the fowler's snare. The snare has been broken and we have escaped. Our help is in the name of the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. All kinds of things can still overwhelm you. We've just given a few examples so far. But none of them can overwhelm him. The one who can overwhelm them all is on our side. And God knows. God is well aware that's not easy to understand. Because one of those overwhelming things is the constant nagging doubt. Because you can still go through all kinds of terrible things. That's what the second lesson is about, right? Paul lists a lot of good things, but also a lot of terrible things. A lot of terrible things still happen in this world. In fact, part of God's power, this is why it's such a struggle, part of God's power I referenced before. Since he's the maker of heaven and earth, and he establishes the purpose of everything, part of his power is to let us rule and live with the consequences. Sometimes those consequences can be terrifying, overwhelming. And when that happens, turn to this psalm. When the overwhelming power of things that you cannot control raise doubts in your mind, read this psalm. Keep it handy. Print it out. Bookmark it on your phone. Whatever the case may be. When the consequences of a broken world feel overwhelming, let this song be a reminder that your God isn't just hopefully on your side. You don't have to debate about whether or not he's on your side. Because even though he's the man in the boat with the overwhelming power to shut down the winds and the waves, he also subjected himself to being overwhelmed. He came into this world not giving birth to himself, but being a baby who had to be born. He knows personally helplessness. To help you remember, in helplessness, your God knows you. He knows that situation. He knows how it feels, and he knows how to address it. Your God knows the helplessness of going off into the abyss of death, your death even, the one we would have brought upon ourselves if God had just let everything overwhelm us. He was overwhelmed by that death. You don't have to wonder whether he's on your side, even though you're bound to. It's going to happen. That's he who struggles with God. That's the name of God's people, right? Israel's he who struggles with God. You're bound to wonder, but in the end, you don't have to prove anything. He's proven it already. He has lived in this place. He put aside his power so he could feel what it was like to be one of us, and so that we would know that he had. God has overwhelming power, and that is terrifying, because if he's not on our side, let Israel say, if he's not on our side, yeah, we would lose. But our God plainly is. Our God was so tired, he fell asleep in the back of a boat in the middle of a storm. Overwhelmed, I suppose you'd say, with sleep. Not because he lacks power, but because we know the terror of overwhelming power. And he wants us to see in that little baby, in that sleeping carpenter, in that man who died crucified, a God who has ultimate power but will not use it, nor allow anything else to use power such that it destroys who we are, who you are. He'll let you live. In a broken world, that doesn't always feel good, but he'll let you live. You'll experience things like he experienced. But know this. That baby, that carpenter, that crucified man, he has answered the question of whether or not God could possibly not be on our side. He answers that question so definitively that it doesn't matter what sin we have legitimately committed, that we can only imagine his wrath toward. Because what Jesus did answers the question, could he possibly be mad at me about that? Satan can point to you and say, God couldn't possibly be on your side, not for a person like that. And you can point to Christ and say, tell me, Satan, what wrath is left? If God with all power to deal with a sinner like me chose to deal with it by being a man like that, what is left to prove? Because that is overwhelming love. Power turned to victory over death, and life eternal with a God on our side. Amen.
Amen.
Please stand.